Hello, everyone. At one time, the typical daily intake at the National Security Agency included nearly 445,000 email address books from Yahoo and over 82,000 from Facebook. I'm Jim Falk, President of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth, and thank you so much for joining us. For today's council conversation is with Bart Gellman, who joins us to discuss his new book, Dark Mirror, Edward Snowden in the American Surveillance State, which was published just a few weeks ago by Penguin Press. As we will learn shortly, Snowden's leaks, or someone might say revelations, unveiled to those charged with overseeing the National Security Agency, as well as the American public, the vast power of the government to gather, possess, and to actually hold on to data, circumventing what were assumed to be acceptable boundaries. I read the book this past weekend and I found it absolutely fascinating and also an enjoyable read. Let me tell you a little bit about Bart. Bart is a graduate of Princeton University. He was a Rhodes Scholar, and he's currently a staff writer at the Atlantic magazine and a senior fellow at the Century Foundation. He also wrote the New York Times bestseller, Angler, all about Vice President Dick Cheney. His strong association with the Washington Post goes back just slightly over 2 decades, where he covered legal, diplomatic, military matters, and he was also the bureau chief in Jerusalem for a few years. In 2013, Edward Snowden reached out to him, as well as to Glenn Greenwald and to documentary filmmaker Laura Poitras. And from those initial contacts, the story begins. Bart led the post coverage of the NSA and Edward Snowden and all of the revelations. And we'll be touching on most of that, as much as that as we can today. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 2014, he and his team, Pulitzer Prize for Public Service for their coverage of Edward Snowden and the NSA. And in 2002, he also won a Pulitzer with his Washington Post team for the coverage of the 9/11 terrorist attack and the aftermath. So Bart, congratulations on your book. Like I said, I enjoyed it, learned a lot, and thanks for spending an hour of conversation with our members.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
So as I mentioned, this is a question that I've listened to 1 or 2 of your podcasts and you get asked all the time, and you get probably a little tired of responding, but it is a question that people probably tend to have. While reasonable people may disagree on how Edward Snowden released the data and what he released, you do not describe him neither as a spy, nor do you consider his acts to be acts of treason. Why not?
Well, treason is well defined in the Constitution, and it's a simple test. It means that you've transferred your allegiance to another country at war with the United States with the intention of harming your own country, with the intention of harming the United States. And there's just no plausible argument that this has anything to do with Ed Snowden. He has not transferred his allegiance to another country. He's living in another country that he did not choose to go to. He described his reasons for what he did as in terms of the public interest of the United States. He wanted to help his fellow citizens decide what the boundaries should be of secret intelligence in a free society. And there's no one actually at a senior level in the US government who is familiar with the case who doubts that that was his actual motive. They have lots of criticism on lots of grounds, but they don't doubt that he did what he did based on his own concept of what was good for his own country.
And as you note in the book and from other conversations, he probably really didn't take any of the information to Russia. Is that a fair statement?
I know what steps he took. He destroyed the material, and he destroyed his access to the material in any other place before he left Hong Kong. He had a specific encryption key, and he destroyed it, which meant that the data was inaccessible to him then or later.
So when he went to Hong Kong, he really, I don't think, was planning on going to Moscow, was he? He really hoped to go to another country or other countries.
Well, he was aiming for Ecuador. His itinerary, which I've seen, took him via Moscow and then Havana to Ecuador. That was just his changes of plane. The U.S. government, State Department, canceled his passport in an attempt to to prevent him from traveling. They tried to prevent him from leaving Hong Kong. They canceled the passport just too late. He was already midair on the way to Moscow. When he got there, he did not have valid travel papers going forward. And so he got stuck in the Moscow airport for something like a month while he worked through his request for political asylum in Russia.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, most of this happened, well, it did happen in 2013. And so that's, you know, 7 years ago, and I'd forgotten a lot of it. And if someone had said to me, was Snowden a high school dropout or did he complete college? I would have said, yeah, he was a high school dropout. But that only meant that he did not get a diploma from a high school. Tell our audience a bit more about just how smart he was and how accomplished in computer skills. And
he's an autodidact. I mean, quite honestly, he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. He had, you know, if you put any stock in the Stanford Binet IQ test, his testing is off the charts to a tiny fraction of 1% of the population. And he was bored by lots of things that were happening in high school. And like a lot of bored teens, he paid attention to what he cared about. He got sick with mononucleosis in his junior year and was out of school for months, and he never came back. He got his GED the same year he would have graduated. He took a bunch of college level courses and a bunch of engineering courses, computer engineering courses. Sometimes he took the exams for certifications without even taking the courses. He would master, you know, some body of knowledge, become a Microsoft certified security engineer, for example, or systems engineer, without fully finishing the coursework. But he was able to pass the 7-part exam. So he taught himself computer skills, and he was quite proficient.
so how did he enter the national security arena?
Well, it's funny. He tried to enter it by joining the Army. He had discovered a shortcut to the special forces, where it's a program called 18 X-ray, under which Army recruits who score high enough on their aptitude tests and on their physical fitness test can be entered into a program where you go straight from basic training and then advanced infantry training and ranger training, and you end up in the U.S. Special Forces with sergeant stripes in a very compressed period of time. And during the basic training, he broke both legs. And so he left the Army and came home dispirited, looking for something else to do. And he took the first job he could find, which was as a security guard at a facility in Maryland that was being built, that was going to be a civilian facility that did contract work for the NSA. So in order to be a security guard there, he had to have a classified clearance. And that was his entry point into the world of the national security establishment, because so many of the jobs that he would later apply for, actually all of the jobs he would later apply for, required that he have a top secret SCI clearance. That is to say, he was cleared to know sensitive compartmented intelligence information, SCI. And because he got that at the security guard post, he was able to go to job fairs and qualify for jobs in computer science. And that was his first job, working for the CIA in their information technology section.
We have a question already from Stephen Shore, and he said, why didn't the United States allow him to proceed to Ecuador, where he would have been easier to apprehend or exfiltrate?
That would have been the rational choice. There was a determination to get him. There was chaos and confusion and the usual sorts of FUD when policies being made on the fly, and they just got the timing wrong. They put a red flag on his passport, invalidating it at just the wrong time. If they'd stopped and thought about it, they for sure would have let him go to Ecuador, where it would have been much easier to get him.
And so one tends to forget that he wasn't really against at all in his career spying or espionage in the beginning.
No, it was 9/11 that caused him to want to join the Army. He came from a military family of Coast Guard warrant officers, and he believed in the mission. He's kind of a libertarian. It's hard to characterize his politics. But he came in believing that he would be serving the country by working for the intelligence services.
What really turned him?
That's a question I spend a lot of time on in the book. I mean, the book tells the life story of Snowden as sort of one of its three main features is who is this guy? Where did he come from? How did he learn how to do what he did? Why did he do what he did? And it's a tough one to call. I doubt there was any one moment. He has tried on occasion in interviews to say that it was this or that moment that caused him to do it, but I think there was a gradual process of disillusionment, of seeing things that bothered him. He saw that intelligence gathering can be kind of messy and ethically compromised when he was stationed in Geneva for the CIA. And he saw things at the NSA that truly disturbed him in terms of, this was his introduction to the secret world in which US intelligence agencies were gathering immense quantities of information about their own citizens, among others. This is not something you know until and unless you work there, because those boundaries had been shifted in secret in ways that the American public not only didn't know, but were being misled about. So those things started to build up and bother him. And, it takes a certain personality, and we could talk about that as well.
I'd like to get more into his personality, because he's like now in Moscow, as you've had some conversations with him on the phone and also have seen him, you've been to Moscow, he's really quite comfortable now. I mean, he does, as you said many times in the book, he doesn't need a lot of possessions. He misses his milkshakes, but as you said, he doesn't have a blender.
Well, the actual fact is that he refuses to confirm or deny possession of a blender. And it sounds funny, but it's part of the extraordinary operational security that he has practiced in order to protect himself. And it is true that US intelligence assets are capable of detecting the electromagnetic emanations of household appliances. And if they knew he had a blender, and then they could, look in candidate apartments for his location and determine whether there was a blender there or not. And so he just habitually won't offer clues that could be used to locate him.
And he's still incredibly cautious about his personal effects, his computer.
He is. I would go and spend, a couple of days at a time with him, very, very long days. So we would have 3 meals together. And when he went up to go to the bathroom, he picked up his laptop and brought it with him. Even with me as a reporter he trusted, he wasn't going to leave his electronics exposed. And I said, isn't that going a little bit far? And he said, it's not that hard to do it. And if anything I can do to cut down on the attack surface, I'll do it.
I have a good friend who I'm sure is watching who is exactly the same way. Mike Goodman says, didn't Snowden get disillusioned while with the CIA in Geneva, where the agency was trying to catch a Swiss banker in a compromising position?
That's one of the stories he's told, and I alluded to it earlier. It was a banker from Saudi Arabia who they were trying to bring from a sort of a friendly cocktail party conversation relationship to an agent relationship in which the banker would be working for the CIA, and that wasn't happening. And so they made use of the fact that they got him drunk, knowing he was about to drive, called the police secretly so that he would be arrested for drunk driving, and offered help get him out of it if he would cooperate. And Snowden just saw that as dirty pool.
As a reporter, can you walk us through your thought process when you first connected with Snowden and saw the document? So, go back a little bit before that. How did Snowden reach out to you?
Right. So this is a story I tell. I give a complete sort of no holds barred, part the curtains, real-time account of exactly how I proceeded. How did Snowden first reach out to me? How did I vet him, and so on. I have the benefit of our verbatim conversations because almost all of our communication, um, even to this day, is done by either live or time delayed chat over anonymous channels. So I have all the words that we spoke, and I've reproduced those in the book. But my first approach was from an unnamed person who used the handle Virax, or truth teller in Latin. I had to go look that up. And he said that he was from the intelligence community. He had a big story about overreach by US government intelligence that was dangerous to democracy. And was I interested? And I said, well, maybe. Now, the first time that I hear a claim like that, and unfortunately, I get a lot of them. You get a lot of people who, as a reporter, who come to you with the scoop of a lifetime, and many of them are disturbed or misled or liars. And so my first reaction to getting this supposed scoop from an intelligence source was, oh no, not this again. But there was something just plausible enough about it that I wanted to keep talking. And so I asked him questions and he asked me questions. And we went through a period of intense vetting in which I was trying to figure out whether this was authentically a member of the intelligence community, whether there was any actual information, whether the person knew what they were talking about, whether the things they said were true. And he was trying to figure out, could he trust me to do the story? Because he was skeptical of mainstream media. He believed that it was just as likely as not that I or the Washington Post would refuse to run the story if the government asked us to, and that we would bury the news. And he was very much afraid of that. I found that to be a fanciful idea. It didn't strike me as being someone familiar with my world at all. And that was never going to happen. But he took some persuading.
But at that point, you weren't with the Washington Post. And I guess at the same time, he was also reaching out to Glenn Greenwald. So why you? Why, Washington? You weren't with the Washington Post, but you certainly had a reputation. So why did he reach out to you and, to use the phrase, the mainstream media? Was it to provide a certain degree of legitimacy or to be sure it was read in DC?
Well, I think both of those things are true, but I wasn't his first choice. His first choice was Glenn Greenwald. He reached out to Glenn in December and January, and Glenn did not respond because Snowden required communications to be encrypted. He was not going to talk about the stuff on open email. He said, please, Glenn, learn how to use the encryption software, and here's what you need to know. And Glenn ignored that, and then he made a video, an anonymous video for Glenn saying, here, let me walk you through it. Here's how you use the software. And Glenn ignored that. So he went then to Laura Poitras, the filmmaker. Laura,
and you're friends with her. You've known her for a long time, right?
Laura and I had known each other. And she had once come to me for help with encryption, in fact, because I'm one of these sort of propeller heads who early on came to think I needed to worry about digital security and the digital exhaust left by me and my sources, that I needed to protect myself. And Laura was in a position where she needed to protect herself, and she got advice from me. She came to me after Virax reached out to her and said, I've got this alleged source. I'm worried that it's a setup. I'm worried that it's not true. I'm worried that it could be any number of things. Can you help me figure this out? And then she got Snowden's permission to talk to me after I went back and forth many times with him. So I was asking him dozens of questions, more than dozens, about the purported document that he was going to give me, because we were talking about one document. And how would I know that it was authentic, and what kind of chain of custody could he describe for it, and who was it from, and was it, some low-level staff draft, or was it authoritative somehow about what it was talking about? And this is all without having seen the document yet. I'm trying to authenticate it almost without seeing it until he's ready to show it to me. And then, the day comes and he sends the one document. This is a document describing the so-called PRISM program, which obtained high volumes of information from large US internet companies. And then the next day came another unexpected drop. And this one had tens of thousands of documents. And the truth is, I was overwhelmed by that. I was frightened by it. I didn't know how to protect it. I didn't know how to authenticate and verify the information in such a large quantity of documents. I wasn't prepared to crowdsource it because I saw right away that there were things in there that should not be public. And Snowden himself did not think they should all be public. If he wanted them all public, he would have put them on the internet, or he would have gone to WikiLeaks, which.
So, where was he at this point in time? Was he in Hawaii?
In my early communications with him, he was in Hawaii. I didn't know that, and he transferred the documents on one of his first days in Hong Kong. I also didn't know that. It was not until the second tranche of documents came that he told me his name and his whereabouts.
So we have a few more Snowden questions, and we'll broaden the conversation. Mike Goodman has asked two questions here. Is Snowden in contact at all with Ed Lee Howard, a CIA agent who defected to Moscow, CIA officer who defected to Moscow during the Cold War? Is Snowden serving as a consultant for the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service?
The first answer I don't know the answer to. I am morally certain that Snowden is not in touch with Ed Lee Howard. He doesn't want any association with defectors. He is not a defector himself. Doesn't see himself that way. And let me spend another 30 seconds on that.
Sure.
If you want to go work for Foreign Intelligence Service, the way to do it is not to steal documents, make contact with 3 journalists, and then share all the documents with the journalists. I mean, if you're a Foreign Intelligence Service, what you want is exclusive access to secrets that the target government doesn't know have been lost. That's your first choice. If you decide that you want to leak some of those documents for strategic effect, as Russia has subsequently done, you want to make that decision yourself. You don't want to have some guy dump a great big pile of them on 3 different journalists and leave to them to decide what to make public and when. It just, the fact pattern just doesn't fit. He does not need money from the Russian government. He supports himself he's got a US job, a US based virtual job. He gives paid lectures. He tells me, and I can't prove it one way or another, that he does not consult with the Russian government. Everything about him that I know would be inconsistent with him doing that. And let me also say that I've asked high-ranking US government officials, including 2 deputy directors of the NSA, whether they believe that he is working for the Russian government. And they said they have no basis to believe that.
One of the, did he provide the same documents to all 3 of you, or to at least you and Glenn, or?
He provided the same documents to me and Laura Poitras in that second tranche. I can't say for sure what he gave to Glenn.
So once you realized that these documents were authentic and you got over the shock of it, how did you decide to go to the Washington Post and tell that story? Because it really does show some of the courage that the Washington Post took and the risk as well that they assumed. So
I'm a freelance reporter at this point. I'm a fellow at the Century Foundation in New York, which is a small progressive think tank. I have a contract as an outside contributor to Time magazine, where I admire the journalists that I'm working with, and I've written by then some good meaty stories about Bob Mueller at the FBI and extreme right-wing militias and so on, and they're interested in deep reporting. But I go to my editor and say, I have a line on a highly sensitive story about the NSA, and it's going to involve classified information, and I want to know whether the magazine is interested, and does the magazine feel that it's equipped to handle a story of this kind. And the short answer, which took a long time to find out, was that Time Inc. And the Time Warner Corporation in particular were not prepared to deal with a classified document. We're not prepared to write about classified things. I was told by their lawyer, I was instructed that I was not to discuss anything classified with my editors. I was not to accept anything classified on behalf of the company, and that if I wanted to interview someone from government, I should send the questions through this lawyer. So anybody who knows my world at all knows that that was a non-starter, and I had to leave, and I resigned. I then had to decide where to take it. I had left the Washington Post, you know, with some dissatisfaction at the direction it had taken. I had spent 21 great years there, and it felt as though the economic pressures on the paper and the leadership choices of one particular editor were taking it in a direction I didn't agree with. And so there was a mutual parting of ways there. And I wasn't sure I wanted to go back, but they had this new editor who had a great reputation, a guy named Marty Barron, who came from the Boston Globe, and is portrayed in the movie Spotlight, which I highly recommend as a surprisingly accurate portrayal of how journalism really works. And Marty had a great reputation, and I decided that I should go back to the place I knew. I called the investigative editor, who I knew well, at home one Sunday night, and I said, I need a meeting with the new boss as soon as possible. And he said, about what? And I said, it's about a story. It has something to do with national security. I can't say anything more about it on the phone, but he won't regret it. And this editor became exasperated, and he actually ended up hanging up on me. I mean, you know, is that all you can tell me? You want me to tell my boss that he's got to meet some guy who used to work here, but he won't say what about? I mean, it sounded kooky. Yeah. He eventually did make the meeting happen, and I went in and.
Well, let me add something there, because you said it in the book. He called you back and he said he noticed a bit of fear in your voice.
He said that if I was afraid, then that made him afraid, or it made him. Yeah. There must be something.
He realized it was really important. That
we had done substantial work together. He knew who I was. He knew the kind of work I do, and he decided to just take a flyer on this and take a leap of faith. And it was a big leap for him because, you know, he had a new editor-in-chief who was the executive editor, who didn't know him well, and he was putting his neck on the line, saying, you know, this meeting will be worth your time. Well, I go in and I asked that the lawyers be there too. So I'm meeting with the top editor and his number two, and the company lawyers and an outside counsel from Williams and Connolly. And the first thing I did is I asked everyone to please take the batteries out of their cell phones or remove them from the room. And so I'm starting off already, you know, people are looking at me like I've asked them to peel off their socks. Right. And I said, this seems a little much, but it's relevant. And I gave him a sense of what the first story was, the prison story. And I said that this was more sensitive document than the Post had ever possessed. You know, anybody like me who's covered national security for years has run across classified information before, because classification is so rampant that you can't talk about anything to do with intelligence or war or foreign policy without straying very quickly into classified material. But to have in your possession the full text of a document, thousands of words, that's contemporary and stamped SCI, sensitive compartmented information, that was not only unusual, it was unique. And I said, there's stuff in this document that should not be public. That is it just not in the public interest to disclose it. I mean, this document had in it pictures of terrorists who were being surveilled. It had in it, I'm being careful here.
Real sources and methods, I guess, as well, right?
It described particulars of targets and things that the NSA had learned about those targets, which, if disclosed, would end those operations. You know, country X would find out, would be able to understand right away how it was being spied on. And country X was a legitimate adversary, and there was lots of news value in this. I mean, I found out about a WMD program in a country of interest that has not been made public, but disclosing it would blow the source, and I had no intention of doing that. So I told the paper it was going to have to be able to store this material in a safe place. We were going to need a safe and a special locked room with no windows, and a computer that had its networking hardware removed from it, and we would have to have the material encrypted and the encryption key kept in a different room from the material itself, and so on and so forth. And I'm reading off this list of conditions before I can even talk to them, and I felt like I sounded loopy. I sounded like someone you throw out of your office, but Marty did not throw me out of his office. And then I asked him to do something that the lawyer suggested he not do, and Marty said yes.
And the Washington Post agreed to pay your legal fees and so
They
forth?
did. They took me under their umbrella, and that was a relief, because I already knew that I was at risk on several legal fronts for possessing this material and discussing it with anyone and publishing a story about it. That all those things were arguably breaches of the Espionage Act of 1917, which, if it does forbid those things, is, I hope, probably unconstitutional. That if you construe the law broadly enough to cover First Amendment protected activities, then the law should be struck down as overbroad and unconstitutional. But no one knows, because it's never been tested.
And we may see what happens with Bolton's book about the release of classified material.
Well, it would be different, because he is someone like Snowden who had lawful access to classified information, and then allegedly is giving access to that information to someone who does not have lawful access. And the Espionage Act forbids that. In fact, those two elements alone are sufficient to convict you. There's no public interest defense. There's no defense at all, actually. And I think Bolton is in serious trouble.
Have you ever felt, or do you now feel, that you're in any danger? And there's a part of that in the book, which is, I don't know if you want to give it away, about the runaway iPad.
The runaway iPad, yeah. I either fooled myself or accurately told myself that I was not in physical danger, although I was warned by U.S. government official that if a foreign intelligence service couldn't get the documents some other way, that I did risk a physical encounter. I didn't take that very seriously, but I did take very seriously the likelihood and the fact that there were many attempts made to hack into my devices and my accounts. Google gave me an official warning that a state-sponsored attacker was attempting to compromise my account. I found my own name in the NSA archive that Snowden gave me as the target of, or as a subject of, a criminal investigation.
And that dated back to 1999, if I remember.
That dated back to 1999. So I knew the U.S. government was interested, and I knew that, of course, that there was an intense investigation into Snowden's own behavior, and I would have to be implicated in that. I knew that my devices were behaving strangely. I was getting text messages and emails that had no sender, no subject, and no date, which is a known attack vector. I sent an image of the memory of my computer to a renowned security expert who told me that there were demons that were running in the background. Demons is an actual computer term, not the other kind. That didn't belong there. So I switched computers. I was in the back of a car one day, having just left Face the Nation at CBS News, when my iPad switched itself off, then back on again, and the screen guttered out into a Unix terminal screen, which started to say that it was discarding the operating system, loading new kernel, et cetera, et cetera. It was being taken over in front of my eyes by someone far away. And that's especially disturbing because remote access zero-day exploits of the iPad operating system are very difficult to create and very expensive. I know that there are companies that broker these hacks for a living, and they will pay $1 million bounties for an untethered hack. That is to say, you could hack into someone's device without having physical possession of it. I didn't want to be worth that kind of expenditure by foreign intelligence agencies or by hackers, but I had a lot of evidence that I was, in fact, the subject of those kind of attacks.
We have a number of questions about Julian Assange. Do you think he'll be extradited to the United States? And what are your thoughts about the charges that have been levied against him? And thank you, Ray Termini and Mike Goodman, for those questions.
Though there's a lot to say about Julian Assange. If you catch me making a prediction, and if you can find a way to commoditize that, you should sell short, because my predictions have a terrible track record, and I don't purport to know what's going to happen. That having been said, it doesn't look good for Assange. It looks as though he probably will be extradited. It would be unusual if the British courts did not extradite him for this set of charges. I am very concerned about the charges that have been laid against him. I am not a fan of Assange personally, and I'm not a fan of some of the things he's done. What he's been charged with, however, has nothing to do with Russia or the 2016 election or any of the other unsavory things he's been accused of in public. That he's been charged with asking for information, receiving it, and making it public. And 3 of the counts of his indictment are specifically for publication. That is to say, the sole fact alleged in that count of the indictment, the sole fact required to convict him of a felony, is that he, having obtained classified information, in fact, it doesn't actually even have to be classified, it's just information relating to the national defense is the language of the statute. Having done that, he published it for all the world to see. No one has ever been charged before with espionage by publication. That is to say, someone who was not authorized to have the information in the first place, a recipient. No one's ever been charged with espionage for receiving it, for publishing it. And if he is convicted of that, you could just as easily convict Barton Gellman. There is nothing alleged. I'm not saying that Assange and I are exactly the same, that what we do is the same, but there's nothing alleged in his case other than that he published. And if you could make the charge stick there, you could make the charge stick with me. And that's, I think, a very dangerous thing.
I'm reminded my good friend and co-host Dennis McQuiston for the McQuiston program that anybody who's interested can go to mcquistontv.com and see the 2 interviews that Dennis did with Glenn Greenwald. So Bart, as I'm sure you're well aware, Dallas is the headquarters city for AT&T. And talk with us a bit about the relationship between companies like AT&T and the National Security Agency and intelligence community, because, on one level, I think they perhaps should be working together with the government to a degree for patriotic reasons, but they also get compensated with quite a bit of money.
They do. It is a happy coincidence as far as the NSA is concerned that the United States and U.S. companies are the hubs of global telecommunications and have been for decades. So AT&T in particular had the longest standing relationship with the NSA in in a program that dates back, I don't recall exactly right now. I mean, but probably 50 years. And the NSA does pay tens of millions of dollars, probably over $100 million over time to AT&T for access to essentially the choke points of the global telecom system. For a long time, it was true that long distance calls placed from country A to country B, neither of which is the United States, would pass through US switching points because international calls took the cheapest route rather than the most physically direct. And so a lot of telecommunications all around the world just happened to pass through the United States. The NSA took advantage of that, and AT&T cooperated. Then came the internet and the primacy of digital communications, and the US government tried to make the same relationships with Silicon Valley, much newer companies, with Google and Microsoft. And Microsoft was the first of those. It's the oldest of the big internet companies, and it was the first to forge a relationship with the NSA. And that was done under color of law, of legal compulsion. The Congress had passed a law in 2007 and 2008, had passed that's FAA 702. That would be the FISA Amendments Act of 2008, and Section 702 calls for cooperation from those companies. What we didn't know in public was what that cooperation meant, and it was substantial.
We've been hearing so many people, of course, now because of the virus, talk about contact tracing.
Mm-hmm.
And you use the phrase contact chaining, and how, as you said, how quickly a few can exponentially become millions, or take a penny and double it every day, and before long you'll have a million. I've, in my open with you for this program, I talked about all the address books that Facebook and Yahoo Mail had, and that was really a key part of the book, I thought. And that's when the American public really sort of woke up, as well as the corporations, and saw what was happening. So take a moment and really explain what this contact chaining is, and how quickly every one of us has had our information acquired, and where is it sitting now?
Well, so the NSA is not in the business deliberately of spying on Americans. That's not what it's interested in. I believe that it's run by people who think they're protecting us and are doing their best, and are patriotic Americans, and are trying to find out things that their political masters want them to find out, whether it's about threats to the country or just about interests. I mean, they have a long list of something like 1,000 categories of priority information that they're supposed to find out. Nevertheless, Americans are under their magnifying glass in lots of ways. One is, you mentioned the address books. Let's just be clear about what that is. The NSA sits at the big intersections of the internet around the world, and taps into those and says, anything that looks like an address book, a contact list, we'll take one of those, and we'll keep a copy of it over here. And it's allowed to presume, when it does that overseas, that the people it's surveilling are foreigners. But that's not the way the internet works. The way the internet works is that there's no correlation between the path that data takes and sovereign borders. So if you are, I see there's a graphic on here. I mean, if you are sending an email from Dallas to Fort Worth, it is almost certain, if you're using one of the major internet companies, that a copy of it's going to end up in Quilicura, Chile, or in Singapore, for example, because that's where Google, in this case, has its large data centers. And Google runs a global interlacing network that in which load balancing and other considerations cause your communications to go far from their geographic destination. And then if it doesn't happen that way, it happens with backups. And so if the NSA is grabbing high volumes or full take of information from one of the lines that you're seeing on this diagram, which is the private fiber that connects Google data centers around the world, which it did, then it could just as easily be, and almost certainly is, gathering data from tens of millions of Americans. And so that's one way. The other way that that they come to you and me is this process called contact chaining, which is a big data analytic technique in which you start with immediate contacts of someone who's of interest, and you're looking for people you don't know exist. You're looking for unknown associates of a known target. And so you say, who are all the people this target called? Then who are all the people that those people called? And then who are all the people that that second layer of people called? That's called chaining the contacts, and then operating on those. And if, let's say, so one year, in the year 2013, they put out word after this story broke that the U.S. government only chained contacts on about 300 people that year. And they did that to what they call 2 or 3 hops. So what's that mean? If you look at the contacts for 300 people, and each person has contacts over the course of 5 years with 100 others, which is a fairly conservative estimate, then your first hop takes you to 30,000. And your second hop takes you to 300 million, which is getting around the population of the United States. And so these big data analytic techniques invariably sweep in many or even most Americans into their haul.
So that is happening today. Is that correct?
It is more restricted today because Congress passed a law to restrict it, and the NSA has actually voluntarily stopped that program, which was the collecting of all call data records that every American made. So every phone call you made was being logged, and then these records were stored in a gigantic contact chaining database there at the Black Mirrored building.
So one of the sentences in your book that really struck me, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically those responsible with the various committees in Congress, they don't know what questions to ask. And if they don't ask the question, the people who are giving at the hearings, they're not going to volunteer. And that's happened a lot, hasn't it?
It is very hard to oversee secret operations, even when you're qualified to receive the answer. If the intelligence agency does not volunteer the information, and there's lots that they do volunteer, and there are things like a budget. Actually, the budget is more than 10,000 pages for the intelligence community. That discloses a lot, but if you don't know what to ask, it's very hard to get there. Justin Amash had a very funny way of talking about this and how frustrating it was for a member of Congress to try to get at secret things. He said you just have to throw a bunch of random questions at them. I mean, do you have a moon base? Do you have a robot army? Do you have a dancing bear? He found it inefficient, frustrating, and easy to frustrate if the organization being overseen didn't want to be overseen.
Do you feel that perhaps the agencies are more willing to discuss in a classified format than they are in public? Because we've seen situations like where former Director of Intelligence General Jim Clapper really got caught in some quicksand. And how do you view what happened to him? Do you think that was done on purpose, misleading, or did he realize that he was caught in a bad situation and at that time really couldn't disclose what he knew?
So there was a moment shortly before the Snowden leaks. I'm trying to remember the dates on this, but I believe it was a February testimony. Ron Wyden, the senator, was trying desperately to foment a public debate about something he was not allowed to talk about because Wyden knew what he knew about it only in classified forms, and he wanted to force a public discussion. And so he asked Jim Clapper, does the US government collect any kind of information about millions or tens of millions of Americans? And Clapper said, no, sir. And Wyden, incredulous, said, no. And because he knew the answer was yes, because he knew about these call records program. And Clapper said, sort of hung his head and said, not wittingly, sir. And that was a bad answer. I think Clapper was in a bind because to say yes would be to disclose a classified program. And Wyden purposely put him in that bind. But there are, that doesn't mean that you get a free ticket to lie to the American people if you're asked a question you don't want to hear in a public hearing. And there are established ways of dodging questions. And Clapper's actually, to his credit, not much of a question dodger. So in this case, he was also probably a little bit confused about which program Wyden was hinting about, because something else I don't need to go into right now. What I blame Clapper for is not correcting the record. Wyden's staff asked his staff to please correct the record after the fact and say that answer needs to be amended. And Clapper refused to do that. So he left a false answer on the public record, which became known to be false as soon as the Snowden documents started becoming public.
So not surprising, given your long history of reporting on these matters, you have had professional as well as probably some personal friendships with some of the players like Comey and General Hayden and Jim Clapper. I suspect, and you write this in the book, that they weren't real pleased with you in 2013, 2014. But more recently, you've had breakfast with some of them. We don't have time for you to talk about the conversation you've had with each, but pick whichever one you want and tell us how perhaps their views have evolved over the last few years.
Well, Clapper's a good example. Clapper wouldn't talk to me or look at me even during the period of the Snowden leaks. And he went to Congress in January of 2014, and in his sort of global survey of threats to American interests, he put Snowden first. And he said that he called me and the other two reporters accomplices to Snowden, which has a meaning in law and was rather disturbing, I thought. And nonetheless, several years later, I went to Clapper and said, I'd like to sit down and talk for my book. And he said, well, I want to know what you want to talk about before I submit to a long interrogation. And I made fun of the word interrogation, but I explained my intent, and he agreed to sit down with me, to his credit. We had a 3-hour breakfast, and I go through it word by word in the book. And he is softening somewhat. I mean, he understood that there needed to be a public debate. He's unable to come up with an answer about how that debate could have happened absent someone like Snowden. And he is no longer as confident as he used to be about the safety that's built into the system. That I asked him whether it's possible that they've built a surveillance machinery that is too powerful for the good of the country, that it's too vulnerable to abuse. And he said he used to be completely confident in the leadership, that he trusted himself, he trusted the presidents he worked for, he trusted the people who worked for him to do the right thing. And that Trump's ascension to the presidency had raised new doubts in him, that the system was capable of withstanding someone who was not attuned to the norms and the rules, who was willing to do things that had never been done before and not interested in hearing why you can't do that, sir. And so he said it's possible that we have sort of created a monster that's beyond our control, but he didn't think there's anything you could do about it. I found that fascinating too.
Bart, could I read, or if you want to read it, on page 346 of your book, but what Frank Church wrote?
Oh, please do, because I don't have my book in front of me.
So on August 17th, 1975, he didn't write it, he said it on NBC's Meet the Press, Frank Church, who led the Church hearings that was looking into abuses of the CIA. And again, 1975, we have a very extensive capability of intercepting messages wherever they may be in the airwaves. Now that is necessary and important in the United States as we look abroad at enemies or potential enemies. Next paragraph, oh, and then American would have any privacy left, such as the capability to monitor everything, telephone conversations, telegrams, it doesn't matter. I was amused, of course we don't have the internet. Next paragraph, if this government ever becomes a tyranny, if a dictator ever took charge in this country, the technological capacity that the intelligence community has given the government could enable it to impose total tyranny, and there would be no way to fight back. So I found that very interesting. The church, said that in 1975.
Well, in fact, if King George had possessed surveillance capabilities like this, then the revolution never could have happened. I mean, the organizers would have been picked off one by one, and the founding fathers would have all wound up in King George's jails before they could organize anything. In fact, having too much police power, too much intelligence power, too much surveillance, the ability to see anything, anytime, makes growth and changes in the law almost impossible. I mean, it would have been very hard to imagine coming up with a number of major civil rights reforms if there had been essentially perfect policing at the time.
So we have about a minute left, and one of the questions is, and it's a good way to conclude, what did Snowden accomplish? What changes have come about?
I think he accomplished a great deal. Two major areas. One is in the public debate. If you believe in democracy, if you believe in self-government, if you believe that the government works for us, then there has to be public debate about major aspects of policy. And if the government is going to use secret law to change the boundaries of government intelligence of its own people, if it is going to say it's doing one thing and actually do something else, then the public just can't abide that. We can't have a democracy in which the government is free to keep any secret it wants from us, including what it's doing to us. So he made possible a public debate and a great deal more transparency about those big decisions. It's also a direct result of Snowden that we are much more secure in our electronic communications today than we were then. It's because of him directly that by far the largest part of the internet is now traveling encrypted. That's why you see a little padlock in the top of your browser bar, HTTPS at the beginning of your links. That was not the case 7 years ago. If you were a Yahoo Mail customer, your email went back and forth unencrypted, and hackers and fraudsters and privacy invaders could easily read what you were writing. And now all those things are done over locked internet connections, which has made us all much more secure, not just against surveillance, but against fraud and other kinds of bad behavior on the net.
Well, Bart, as I expected, I've certainly enjoyed the conversation. I don't know if our viewers can see what the book looks like, but I think I bent every single page. I found it so interesting, and I hope people will pick up a copy of Dark Mirror. And Bart, we look forward to reading your upcoming articles in The Atlantic. I want to thank Morgan Henley, one of our interns that helped provide a briefing book for me for this program. Thank you all, and Bart, continued good luck on the virtual book tour. Thanks so much, everybody, and we'll see you on Friday. Thank you.